So what I will say to add to Libby, thank you for the wonderful introduction, and thank you to everybody at PRO for inviting me to give this presentation today. I will add that before I came to Signature Hospice Eugene, I was the regional coordinator for the Alzheimer's Association here in the Eugene area and 3 counties here. And that is how Libby and I first started working together, because she's the Parkinson's person and I was the Alzheimer's person. And I'm gonna dive in by going ahead. Let's see. So I'm subtitling this, How Art and Music Can Support Someone Living with Parkinson's Disease. Okay, let me just get on here so I can change. So you heard about me. And here's the opening quote. Not only is music one of the fundamental ways that we bond with each other, it also literally shapes our brains. So that's a quote from Oliver Sacks. He's a noted neurologist and author. All of you know that medications like carbidopa and levodopa usually do the heavy lifting when it comes to helping to manage the many symptoms of Parkinson's disease. But it's only in the last 10 years that medical science has started doing clinical trials on other non-pharmaceutical treatments that may also play a role in alleviating Parkinson's disease symptoms. Today, I'm here with you to discuss some recent studies on the effects of music and art on those living with Parkinson's disease. The practice of music and art, when it's implemented side by side with traditional pharmaceutical treatments for Parkinson's, is sometimes referred to as complementary therapy. Some of the other complementary therapies that have shown positive results in improving the quality of life for those living with Parkinson's are boxing, Tai Chi, ping pong, yoga, meditation, theater, and dance therapy. Incorporating music and art into the life of someone living with Parkinson's disease has been shown to improve their day-to-day quality of life, mitigate symptoms, even to delay the onset of some of those symptoms. So that's kind of the overall. Now I have to show this to you, explain this to you, and prove this to you. Making music and art part of a weekly routine doesn't just help those with this chronic neurological disorder physically, but these recent studies are finding that music and art also have a positive effect on the person's mental, emotional, social state as well. Happiness, satisfaction, feelings of camaraderie, they can all be increased by involvement with music and art, as shown in recent studies. I have to insert my own personal note here that you can hear from my bio that my background is mainly in Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. And Libby first approached me to give this talk because I had done a education program on the effects of music and art, positive effects for those with cognitive decline, Alzheimer's disease or another dementia. And I said yes, of course, because I thought I could just modify the PowerPoint that I had created. But the more I researched, the more it became clear that while exposure to music and art, yes, can alleviate symptoms for those with both medical conditions, the physiological processes involved, the symptoms and how they are alleviated, and the medical conditions themselves, they're so different that I realized I actually had to create a separate education program for music and art and Parkinson's and keep the one separate for the one that I already had that had to do with Alzheimer's and dementia, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to talk about anything except for these large generalities, and that's not really helpful. So here we go. Here's the result of some recent research, the results of recent research on the general population and research that was done for those with Parkinson's disease. Music improves mood by helping us feel happier and less anxious. And I put the dates next to the slides there that the studies were done. Singing can improve the quality and the clarity of both speech and singing in those who have Parkinson's disease, and it can also prevent the deterioration of vocal quality. Parkinson's disease cannot be diagnosed until about 95% of the dopamine producing cells have been destroyed. That's the official diagnosis. But music can utilize the remaining 5% of those cells to produce more dopamine. So that's not on there. That's a study from 2005. Music and rhythm can improve mobility, gait, proprioception, which we'll talk about in a little bit, postural control and balance for those living with Parkinson's disease. Music increases the actual physical volume and activity of the brain's corpus callosum. That's right here. It allows both regions of the brain hemispheres to communicate with each other. And this can increase creativity and effectiveness in problem-solving skills. And there is a strong connection between music and memory. Music aids in creating and storing and retaining memories more effectively. That's from 2011. And then this one is also not on there, but music therapy participants can improve their positive coping skills and anger management skills compared with other therapy forms. So it isn't just music that can help. The same can be said for going to an art museum or creating visual art. But I'm going to start off with music, and then we're going to look at the practice of music therapy, and then we'll go into art and the practice of art therapy. So why, you may ask, are music and art so special in relationship to a chronic neurological disorder like Parkinson's disease? Many of the abilities that enable us to function in the world, and sorry, just checking the chat here, and I'm not good at multitasking. So we have many abilities that help us to function in the world that are located in one part of our brain. We have a region that's our language center. We have a region that's our vision center. We have a center for short-term memory. But this isn't true of the regions of our brain that get activated when we engage in music and art. Our ability to engage in music and art doesn't reside in just one specific area in our brain. Whenever we're engaging in a musical activity, we're firing up or activating multiple parts of our brain. To sing along to a song, to play an instrument, attending a concert and listening, creating a painting, listening to music as I drive. Our brain is activating many different regions in all of the cortexes in my brain, and all at the same time. If one region of my brain has been affected by a neurological disease, then any activity that's involving music or art is a really effective way to activate multiple areas of my brain. And that allows me to tap into regions of my brain that maybe have been compromised, whether it's by Parkinson's, another neurological disease, or dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So for this reason, when a piece of information that's connected to music gets embedded in our brain, it's not going to easily be lost. If you think back to the cigarette advertisements that you heard as a kid, I may be a little older than you, but they're all still there in my brain, connected to those jingles, or the prayers maybe that were sung at a childhood house of worship. Those are still there, rattling around in my brain, coming up at random times. And this is one of the big reasons why music and art are so special in relationship to Parkinson's disease, as well as to, you can imagine, Alzheimer's disease and dementia, since that definitely affects memory. But this is where the overlap kind of stops. So let's move on. And things that are specific in recent research. Parkinson's disease. So we know that some of the hallmark symptoms of Parkinson's disease are the reduction of dopamine production and the subsequent changes in the central nervous system as a result of that. We know that that can lead to abnormal gait pattern, to balance problems, vocal changes, difficulties in performing activities of daily living. But what's really interesting then is how, if I listen to music, or if I sing or participate in an activity that's artistic just a few times a week, how can that help contain the effects of aging and diseases such as Parkinson's in my brain? Well, it turns out that listening to, performing, creating music can actually improve brain health. Can everybody, are people following me? Am I talking too loud? Okay, am I talking too fast? Great. There's a quickly growing field of research exploring the importance of music for both brain development and healing from brain injuries and other neurological disorders. So as I mentioned, there's no music center in my brain. And our human ability to remember tunes, lyrics, perceiving a tone or different tones, timbre, pitch intervals, melodic contours, harmonies and rhythms, it taps into areas all over my brain. When I'm listening to music, oftentimes I may often anticipate the next note, whether it's listening to a scale or even if the next note isn't played. And that involves yet another part of my brain that comes alive with music. So it's this massive involvement of areas all over my brain that gives music participation the power to alleviate and in some cases to reverse the damage caused by a chronic neurological disorder or traumatic brain injury. So this slide is talking about one of the tools that was used to carry out this research. It's called a functional MRI or fMRI. And the studies that were done with this type of magnetic resonance imaging MRI, what they do is they showed a spike in endorphins and dopamine in people when they're exposed to music. So the increased presence of these endorphins and dopamine levels, as you know, those are our feel-good hormones. They in turn generate a feeling of belonging and of community. One of the leaders in this research is Larry Sherman. He's a professor of neuroscience at Oregon Health Sciences University up in Portland. And he and other researchers have used functional MRI images to see how music exposure activates, or you could say even lights up, whole regions of the brain. For example, playing a musical instrument, that uses the largest amount of our brain power, activates the greatest area of our brains because we're involving the actual playing of the instrument. So I'm using hands, mouth, fingers, I'm reading music, I'm listening, I'm emotionally reacting to the music, and so on. But if I'm learning new music, or I'm playing or singing, or just listening to music, maybe a song that I really love, that can also strengthen the connections in the brain, and it can even drive the creation of new nerve cells in the brain. So that's a fascinating thing because we are just learning now that what most of us learned when we were younger, that we never make new brain cells anymore, is not exactly correct. Engaging in music, this is a quote from Larry Sherman, engaging in music can physically alter and to some degree improve the function of the brain. So Dr. Sherman says this, and that's kind of echoing the quote that I opened with. Let's look a little at research and clinical trials. And let's start with, you know, that soaring feeling of inspiration that sometimes we feel when we're playing an instrument or singing or listening to music. Well, that feeling comes about because engaging in music is actually rooted in our brain chemistry. There's a study in 2005, and it showed that listening to music can cause a release of dopamine. This response to involvement with music has been strongly correlated to the areas of our brain that are involved in reward processing. Researchers have concluded that there's a mechanism by which listening to music that we enjoy evokes physiological reactions and dopamine-enhanced feelings of reward. This is why listening to music that we enjoy can be such a meaningful and emotional experience. Another interesting point is performing and engaging in music can alter various processes in the brain and in the brain cells, and that can actually slow down the progression of some symptoms of Parkinson's disease and improve other areas that have been impaired by Parkinson's. There's a 2017 study of those living with Parkinson's disease, and it's a musical and rhythmic intervention, and it resulted in overall improvements in mobility, in reductions in disease-specific motor symptoms, and an improved perception of general quality of life for the participants. So I'm going to go into that more soon. I just want to say that Dr. Sherman of OHSU, of Oregon Health Sciences University, he says also that the larger the group that you are in when listening to music, the bigger the effect. So if I go to a rock concert, a classical music concert, an outdoor concert, I have an even greater effect of that meaningful emotional experience. So he jokes, if only we could get Congress to sing together. Okay. Grab a drink of water. Music is medicine. For those of us who have a neurological condition, such as Parkinson's disease, maybe it's dementia, traumatic brain injury, cerebrovascular accident, seizure disorder, or a brain tumor, involvement with music and art can often be excellent medicine. There was a meta-analysis done they took 14 different smaller studies back in 2017, and they did this meta-analysis, and it showed that music intervention reduced self-reported pain and pain severity, as well as reducing depression and anxiety rates. It did this both by activating the brain's reward centers and also by lowering those stress hormones. A little more on that too, coming up soon. But the findings of this meta-analysis suggest that just listening to music can modify the perception of discomfort. It also can lower levels of depression and anxiety for those with chronic pain. What's really interesting is that participants in these studies were actually able to use fewer pain medications. Moving on then, I wanted to focus on 2 research studies on music and Parkinson's disease. And there's still only a small number of research studies done in the music therapy discipline that focus specifically on people with Parkinson's disease. Those studies have mostly also just had a small number of participants, but I'd like to go into a little more detail on 2 of these research studies. The first one was called The Effect of Group Music Therapy on Mood, Speech, and Singing in Individuals with Parkinson's Disease. Most of you know that voice impairment can be one of the earliest and most frequent symptoms of Parkinson's disease. And this can cause the person living with Parkinson's to feel embarrassed, to avoid social interactions that require speaking. And these disorders involve pulmonary functional impairments and muscular and physiological support for speech. So in this study, it was only done on 10 people. That's what I mean about small studies. But they took 10 people who are living with Parkinson's. They engaged them in group singing. They tested for speech, for singing quality, for voice ability, for depressive symptoms. They analyzed and tested for those before, during, and after the engagement in the singing, and they used corresponding rating scales. The study found that significant improvements in singing quality and voice range happened, and also there was an absence of decline in speaking quality. So those were the outcomes. There had been an expected decline over the time period in speaking quality, but there wasn't. Specifically, if you're interested with the singing quality and voice range, the increases that they noted were increases in vocal intensity and consistency of intensity, increases in singing pitch accuracy, increases in voiced sound, and decreases in voiceless sound, and increases in voiced range. So what's interesting, this study did not show significant changes in depressive symptoms, but the results do support that group singing is a promising intervention for those living with Parkinson's disease. So the second study that I wanted to look into a little more in detail, a little larger study, it's called Neurologic Music Therapy Training. So that's a type of music therapy for mobility and stability rehabilitation with Parkinson's disease. This study did not focus on voice impairment. This study examined a combination of 3 music therapy techniques and whether they were going to improve gait, stability, and postural control in those living with Parkinson's disease. This was a larger study. It had 55 subjects with a Parkinson's diagnosis divided between an experimental group and a control group. And the 3 types of music therapy techniques that I'll go into more in detail about the specifics of music therapy, but the subjects participated in all 3 of these music therapy techniques in each music therapy session. And so for 45 minutes, they were engaging in these 3 types of music therapy techniques. They mostly used percussion instruments, the metronome, and rhythmic music, so mostly African and Indian. Those were the basis for each session. And the results showed a significant improvement in the gait measurements in the experimental group in comparison with the control group. Also, substantial differences were found in between the 2 groups in stability tests. So it indicated improvement in proprioception. That's our sense of our body position and movement. What I want to kind of say, the takeaway of these 2 studies, big takeaway, is it's a real significance of the findings that both of these studies, what they're suggesting is that interventions that use my auditory system, interventions that use music, can work to help patients who are living with Parkinson's disease. The first study used group singing and found improvements in voice range and speaking quality. The second study used rhythmic music and found improvements in and found improvements in movement and postural control. There's research being done now, currently, which is trying to determine how long do these effects last for those living with Parkinson's disease, because you're probably already thinking, how long will this last? How often do I need to do it? And also, how can we ensure the maximum benefit for me if I have Parkinson's disease and I participate in one of these interventions with music and art? Hey, so this is kind of a side note, but it's an important side note because, and you may have heard about this. It's really interesting. It's a really interesting finding. Certain Parkinson's medications can be a source of increased creativity. So there's a pretty large body of evidence that people with Parkinson's disease might actually experience an increase in creativity or even develop a brand new creative awakening that's fueled by the actual medications that they're prescribed to mitigate the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. This was new to me. I'm guessing that those of you at Pro and many others of you on, it's not new to you, but the pharmacological treatments that have been linked to this effect of increased artistic creativity, for those people that are simply using them as drugs that their doctor prescribes for treatment of Parkinson's, they're levodopa and dopamine agonists. And I've put the brand names up there of the different dopamine agonists, that have been linked to this effect. Let me see if I can pronounce the generics of them. Pramipexole is generic for Mirapex, and ropinirole for Requip, rotigotine for Nupro, and apomorphine for Apkin. It's interesting that this sort of suddenly or newly appearing artistic creativity took the form, it was many different media. It was people suddenly starting to paint, do graphic design, drawing, sculpting, glass painting, writing poetry, short stories. There's even a study from 2013 that discusses various artistic accomplishment of patients who had these results. One person who began taking these prescription medications began composing poems, and actually won an annual contest of the International Association of Poets. And this person was a first-time poet. So this is following the start of what's often referred to as dopaminergic treatment. I want to, just in case you're curious about the mechanism, there's the neurotransmitter dopamine plays a crucial role in this interaction in the brain that supports creation and artistic work. It's a very complex reaction. But new creativity in those people who were prescribed the levodopa and the dopamine agonist drugs, it's at least partly the result of the fact that they're getting this extra dopamine, and the dopamine agonists that mitigate the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. The way they do it is they bind to dopamine receptors. So they're simulating, the effects of dopamine. And sometimes they're simulating those effects to a greater extent. So that's just a little brief thing there to explain that the mechanism involved in these medications sometimes actually overdoes it a little. Most Parkinson's patients experiencing this increase in creativity or newly emerged creativity, it's interesting because they did studies on this. They were pleased with this. They found that it made them feel good. It enhanced their sense of well-being. They felt more productive. They felt more useful. Some of them felt that they'd gained a purpose in life. They felt they could cope better with Parkinson's even. That was a 2014 study. There was 2 other studies done that I saw that also connected this sort of new creativity, this new awakening of creativity with being prescribed these dopamine agonist drugs. And they also concluded that the patients felt good to be in this mood state. They had enhanced self-esteem. But it's important to note that if that medication is decreased, then the patients did describe that level, that new awakening of creativity went down. For example, patients can have a deep brain stimulation surgery, and after that, they no longer need these medications in the higher doses. So the study also showed that there were some patients that really didn't want to cut down on the doses of these medications because they felt that their creativity that they had was dependent on the doses. So I just wanted to say that because we're talking about creativity, and there's this other effect that sometimes doses of medication can cause. I do want to say, though, that there's something different, which is a well-recognized connection between inappropriately high doses of levodopa and dopamine agonists. And that can cause a condition called impulse control disorder, or ICD. This is a well-known complication when the dopamine replacement therapy is when the doses that are being prescribed and that are too high. So I'm not talking about that. So this is not necessarily a good thing to play with, I guess, is what I wanted to say. And it's just keep in touch with your prescriber. Okay, so let's get into the nuts and bolts of why we came here. What is music therapy? A lot of you probably remember there's a congresswoman from Arizona. She's no longer the congresswoman from Arizona, but her name is Gabrielle Giffords. Her husband replaced her, I believe it's as senator. But Gabrielle Giffords was shot in the head in 2011. She was speaking at a rally, and she survived the assassination attempt, but she lost the ability to speak. It was through music therapy with the help of melodies and rhythms that Gabrielle Giffords was able to train her brain again to discover new pathways to be able to speak again. So music therapy can do some amazing things. It's officially defined by the American Therapy Association as, quote, a treatment including creating, singing, moving to, and or listening to music by which clients' abilities are strengthened and transferred to other areas of their lives. There's a wide variety of music-based therapies that are aimed specifically at improving symptoms of Parkinson's disease. And the types of music therapy that have shown positive results with patients utilize many different aspects of music: rhythm, movement, voice, and creativity. The other really cool thing about music therapy is that this can be done at home, right? We're in a pandemic, we're living in isolation. We can do this at home. I want to go into now more deeply, first, the 3 types of music therapy that were used in the study that help with mobility and stability rehabilitation in patients with Parkinson's disease. That was one of the 2 studies that I cited above. And forgive me if I get a little too much into the weeds, but I think that some people really want to know what's this music therapy about. So these are the specific ones that were used in this particular study. And they used, as you'll remember, I said they used 3 types of music therapy. All 3 types together are called neurologic music therapy. And it's a music therapy approach that was established about 25 years ago here in the United States, and it's known as an effective approach to neurorehabilitation. So you'll be interested to know that 2 of these 3 types of music therapy are based on the use of music that has a strong sense of rhythm. First type of music therapy, and just if the names bug you, I'll say them, but try not to like glaze over. And just focus on what the therapy is about. The first one is called rhythmic auditory stimulation, RAS. It's a technique that aims to develop and maintain physiological rhythmic activity. So I'm gait, I'm doing something with my body, and the cues are given by rhythmic music or percussion. And this technique has been proven in studies to be effective, in particular for gait rehabilitation. The second technique, again, big name, pattern sensory enhancement, PSE. And the goal of this technique is a little different. It facilitates movements that are associated with the activities of daily life. And these activities are not necessarily rhythmical in nature. So pattern sensory enhancement, this technique number 2, it uses more complex musical elements, pitch, dynamics, harmony, meter, and also rhythm. And it supports those with Parkinson's disease who are enhancing and organizing movement patterns in time and space. The musical therapy technique of PSE, that's pattern sensory enhancement, it also works to affect activity, muscle coordination, strength, balance, and postural control, and range of motion in a favorable way. Okay, just a little more patience. I'll be out of the weeds in just a second, but the third and last component that was used in this study that's part of the music therapy techniques is called therapeutic instrumental music performance. That's a long one. We can call it TIMP. Therapeutic instrumental music performance uses musical instruments, and oftentimes the people in the music therapy are using the musical instruments. They're either playing them in a traditional way or in a non-traditional way to improve range of motion, to improve limb coordination, postural control, dexterity, their body perception, and sensation. I want to give you some of the specifics of how often this was done in the study too, so you have a sense. This first study, the participants did the music therapy sessions 4 times a week. It's a lot more than the other study I'm going to talk about. 4 times a week for 45 minutes each session, and they did it over a period of 4 weeks. And each session used the 3 types of music therapy in those 45-minute sessions. They started with warm-up exercise to increase range of motion, the trunk, the limbs, to prepare the whole body for further activities. The goal was to reduce stiffness in the muscles. And then the TIMP technique, the TIMP technique, was used here so participants could perform rotations of the upper and lower body, stretching exercises, and movements of the upper and lower limbs. And I'm just going to check in. Libby, I am going a lot into the particulars. Is that, you think, what our listeners want here? Should I continue? It's one more slide on some of the other studies with this.
I think I would ask for some thumbs up or thumbs down. Thumbs down would mean let's move on a little bit through this, and thumbs up would be this is good. So a few of you have your cameras on. You can also use your reactions.
Right. I see
if you
one
want.
thumbs up.
1 thumb down.
I see 2.
I've got thumbs up showing up in the participants bars as well.
I see 3 thumbs up and 1 thumbs down. Was that what you're saying? 2 down?
I got 2 down. So can you go a little bit faster?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
I will. So the study then, I'll just say what it involved. I won't say the different types of techniques that were used, but the next part of the study was trying to address activities of daily living. So it was things like a turning, changing positions, going from lying to sitting, from sitting to standing, from standing to sitting, reaching for an object to the front, above the head, reaching back, stepping up and down. The next part of the session focused on pre-gait training, they call it. So before I'm actually walking, and it was focused on the step length, the shifting of my body weight to the side and forward, and coordinating movements of the upper and lower limbs. And at the end, there was actually simulation of gait pattern. There was a focus on improving gait speed and step length, walking up and down stairs with the assistance of metronome and music. And there were advanced walking exercises, which include initiating and stopping to musical cues, turning, jumping, and backward gait. And then the session ended with some breathing exercises with calm and relaxed music. So other study that I talked about in detail, that was the study that showed improvements in vocal expression and communication of participants who had Parkinson's disease. The music therapy techniques used in that study consisted of breathing to a rhythm, vocal and singing exercises. And this study was done once a week. So not 4 times a week, once a week, but it was done for 20 consecutive weeks. And each session was an hour long. And after an introductory conversation, there were breathing exercises, abdominal inhaling and exhaling. There was controlled breathing that was guided by finger snapping. There were vocal exercises. And then the next thing that was done was actually singing 3 to 5 songs that the participants themselves had chosen. And each weekly session ended with a closing conversation where participants talked about their experiences. So the last thing that I wanted to bring in specific music therapy techniques is from Dr. Rebecca Gilbert. She's a scientific officer, chief scientific officer with the American Parkinson's Disease Association. And she talks about a type of music therapy called rhythmic auditory cueing that's very similar to the RAS, the rhythmic auditory stimulation that I mentioned above, but rhythm is used to facilitate movement, improve gait. It's known that moving or walking to a rhythm can often help those living with Parkinson's disease to improve their movement. And using rhythm or rhythmic music is a technique that's often used by rehabilitation professionals. So along those lines, you may think, well, what about dance? So certain types of dance have been studied to see if they can improve balance and coordination for those with Parkinson's disease. And the ones that have specifically been focused on are tango, ballroom dancing, and Irish step dancing, because they all impose rhythm onto movement. Gilbert also goes on to say that another thing that individual singing or singing in a group or choir has been shown to enhance, besides voice volume and quality, is that low voice volume, sometimes called hypophonia, and that monotonous speech, that's also sometimes a symptom of Parkinson's disease, that this can strengthen muscles responsible for swallowing and breathing, and then improve these 2 symptoms as well. So here's some quick tips for ending music therapy. As I mentioned, you can do this at home. You can use a music app. You can use YouTube, songs off cell phones, computers. There's no cost to this if you want to just use those resources. Another suggestion is using one of those electronic home assistants like Alexa. Alexa, play Elvis. Alexa, play Johnny Cash. Another tip is that if there's other members of the household or family members, they can participate. A sing-along can happen right then and there in the house. Because we talked about the more people that you're singing with, the greater the effect as well. Musicals are also something to not forget. Musicals can be streamed, or the soundtrack can simply be played, but old love musicals, you can sing along to those. And that's very powerful because, as you remember, we talked about that connection between singing and long-term memory, and it can bring up feelings from the past and other stories that can come up. The last thing that I wanted to mention is, was there an instrument that I might have played if I'm the person with Parkinson's disease? If I'm living with Parkinson's disease, did I play an instrument? Can I modify the method? Can I play it with a different technique. So that's the end of the piece on music therapy. And now we're moving on to art. Okay. And I haven't checked the chat, so let me get a drink and just have a quick look. Okay, good. I'm glad some people are, yes, Alexa can be very helpful. Okay, yeah, thank you for the comments. These are wonderful comments. I'm sorry, with my screen, I can't see them unless I actually click on them, but greatly appreciated. So let's start off with the power of artistic creativity. Here's another quote. Creativity in and of itself is important for remaining healthy, remaining connected to yourself and connected to the world. And that's Christiane Strang. She's a professor of neuroscience at the University of Alabama. She's a former president of the American Art Therapy Association. So along with music, art is also another complementary therapy. It's shown positive results in improving the quality of life for those who are living with Parkinson's. The definition of art therapy is just using art media, very general, using the creative process and the resulting artwork to explore feelings, reconcile emotional conflicts, foster self-awareness, manage behavior and addictions, develop social skills, improve reality orientation, reduce anxiety, and increase self-esteem. That quote is from the American Art Therapy Association, and what a broad range of fields that they mention that can be affected by the creative process and art therapy. Again, unfortunately, not only have there not been many studies performed on clinical trials to determine whether art therapy can actually bring about clinical improvements for those living with Parkinson's disease, but there's even less than I was able to find them with music therapy. But the lack of data doesn't necessarily mean that art therapy isn't helpful to somebody who's living with Parkinson's disease, just that these studies on art therapy and Parkinson's disease are the responsiveness, that these studies are lagging behind in checking out those of us who are living with Parkinson's disease, if that can have an effect on our responsiveness. So let's talk about general benefits to all from art involvement. Art projects, this is for everyone, not just with Parkinson's disease. Art projects create a sense of accomplishment and purpose because I've created this piece of art. There it is. It's tangible. I can look at it. I can show it to others. I feel a sense of achievement. I feel useful. And that can be increasingly rare if I'm somebody that's living with a chronic neurological order that's progressing. My mood, my cognitive function, my self-esteem have been shown to be enhanced and improved in studies where art therapy has been utilized, and feelings of isolation, that's been reduced. So that's some of the results in general for all people. What's interesting to me is something with color. Studies have shown that the use of color impacts calmness, comfort, warmth, and serenity. That's from a 2014 study. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but studies have been shown that making art can lower stress and anxiety. We talked about that with music. Study participants had their cortisol levels measured before and then after making art. And as you may know, cortisol is a hormone that helps the body respond to stress. So if I'm stressed out, there's cortisol. So after 45 minutes of creating art with an art therapist, the participants had their cortisol levels significantly lowered. That's pretty exciting. And then an important piece of this study that I really like, because I don't consider myself an artist, is that the research showed that there was no difference in the outcomes between the participants who identified themselves as experienced artists and those who were new to creating art. That's from a 2016 study. Let's talk a little bit about potential benefit of art therapy to those with Parkinson's disease. We know that specifically art, just like music, can enrich the life of somebody with Parkinson's disease. It can allow for self-impress. I'm going to do something here so that It's funny on Zoom, sometimes if I can focus, so I'm back to, this is also a visual thing, by the way. I have to see myself as I'm talking on Zoom. So excuse me, let me start that one over again. But just like music, art can also enrich the life of someone with Parkinson's disease. It can allow for self-expression, engagement, and this can happen even after the disease has progressed. So that's one of the magical things. Another is that my ability to appreciate and create art, just like music, it's distributed throughout many regions of the brain. There's not just one center for art in my brain. So just like with music, if I'm making art, I'm activating my brain cells and the communications between them. So neuroscience research shows that not just music, but visual arts, and I mentioned dance, affect the brain in a more profound way than regular verbal expression does. So this was really interesting to me. A person with Parkinson's, by using art or music, can get in touch with parts of themselves that they may not be able to reach otherwise. And then emotions. Art can serve as an outlet for emotions. If I'm living with Parkinson's disease, I may feel that I'm becoming less and less capable. Maybe I'm feeling like I'm more dependent in certain areas, and art can offer me that opportunity to express those emotions, whatever they may be, whether positive, negative, or in between. I wanted to say that that reward pathway that we mentioned with music, when someone engages in a sort of visual expression, any sort of visual expression, that reward pathway in the brain is also activated. So this can explain to you why an artist feels pleasure during and after the experience of creating art, and why people with Parkinson's disease self-report feelings of happiness and satisfaction. There's a little piece I have here that I'm gonna skip over because of time that talks about, I'm just gonna say briefly, there's oftentimes people with Parkinson's disease have difficulties with visuospatial skills. Depth perception is affected, distance perception, so driving, reading, even walking gets affected. There's a new study that's going on right now that's looking at, this is in NYU Langone in New York. It's looking at the effects of art therapy on visuospatial deficits that are caused by Parkinson's disease. So just want to say there's a lot going on, and this is one of the first studies in this field, and it could be a very important focus. So let's talk about putting art therapy into practice. Making art can include any type of visual creative expression. It can be drawing, painting, collaging, sculpting clay, writing poetry, cake decorating, knitting, scrapbooking, anything that engages the creative mind. And I've quoted Christiane Strang once. I want to quote her again. She says, "There's no one art medium or art activity that's better than another. Do what feels most beneficial to you at any given time." So did everybody hear that? There's nothing that you should or shouldn't do. Strang goes on to say, just let those lines, shapes, and colors translate your emotional experience into something visual. She says, use the feelings that you feel in your body, your memories, because words don't often get it. So once again, she's talking about verbal expression doesn't often get this, but art does. There's also a major tip from a cross-section of art therapists. Let go of the idea that you're not an artist. Just try not to think along the lines of, what am I going to make? Or what's the final product? What if the final product is a piece of you-know-what, right? Know that everyone is capable of creative expression, and remember to breathe. Figure out which mode of creative expression you want to use right now today, maybe clay sculpting, baking, knitting, and then feel the flow. And this is the term used by Garija Kaimal. She does research in art therapy at Drexel University, and she talks about the flow is how you just lose your sense of self and your sense of awareness. When you're creating art and you're in the zone, as we say, right? When you're in the zone, the process of creating art can put you so completely in the moment that you forget all sense of time and space. This is actually a process that's going on. Of course, you know it up here in the brain. And what it does is it's taking several networks in your brain. They're all working, and the results are a relaxed, reflective state, focused attention, and a sense of pleasure. Another tip is if you want to create art in a group, that's fine. Conversation can be part of this. Note that some will enjoy conversation and some prefer to work in silence, or some prefer with music on. There may be some help needed with getting started. So maybe I might need inspiration by flipping through computer clip art or looking through a magazine so that I can feel inspired or get a direction for what I wanted to head towards. Let's talk a little about hand tremor, because we know tremors are an issue and can be with Parkinson's disease. So here you see somebody using a sponge. That's one technique that is sometimes used. That's not a paintbrush. And I'm going to go back to a picture right here. You'll see people using these crazy long paintbrushes. They're dipping the end in paint, but they're standing, and the canvas they're working on is on the floor. And the paintbrush is, it looks like they've taken a broom handle or something. That's also another technique that can be used, as well as some people have said, we just make the tremor part of the technique, incorporate it. Other people have said in studies, this is what I've read in studies, is that when they get into the zone, that the tremor is just not there anymore. And then there's another technique with a paintbrush that you might have heard of, and it's called splatter painting. So I'm holding the end in sort of a different grip, and I can just tap the brush to spread the color around. It's really important to keep all the materials safe and non-toxic, and maybe washable as well, and just leave plenty of time. Keep in mind that the project may take more than one sitting to complete. Just a couple of tips here. Focus only on what you're creating. You don't need to finish the project, and you don't even need to like it. It's important to know, this is an interesting thing, but modeling clay seems to yield greater health benefits, both for those with Parkinson's and without, because it engages the hand. So it's engaging more senses, sense of touch, sight, a sense of three-dimensional space, possibly sound as well. So it's engaging your brain in many different sensory experiences. There was a small study that investigated the effects of people with Parkinson's disease doing clay art, and it showed improvements in hand dexterity, in mood, in quality of life. But again, more studies and larger studies are really needed to confirm this. So on to the next of the tips here. There's a number of studies that are not specifically for those with Parkinson's disease that show that coloring inside of a shape, like a pre-drawn mandala design, is more effective at boosting somebody's mood than coloring on a blank piece of paper, or even coloring in a plaid design. So that was an interesting study in 2012. It showed that coloring inside a mandala, I think it's mandala, actually reduces the anxiety to a greater degree than on a blank piece of paper. It's a good idea to have that special time set aside to create art that can help increase my attention span and my focus. As I mentioned, this study that was done to lower the stress levels, it was found that after 45 minutes, they were significantly lowered. So that might be a good minimum time. And then just designate a corner in your home as the creative corner. Comfortable table, chair, good light, and my art supplies. So this is the final study I'm going to mention today. And this is true for all of us. This is a study that was done on older folks. So the participants were all active 65 and older people. So this study was sponsored by the National Endowment for the Arts, and it was working to show that not just that all of us as we age, not just those of us who have Parkinson's disease or cognitive decline or traumatic brain injury, are benefited by engaging in music and art. What they did was there was a control group, and they maintained their usual activities. Then there was the intervention group, And those people were assigned to a really intense community-based art program. The program was led by professional artists, and this group participated in, listen to this, it's amazing. They participated in painting, in creative writing, in poetry, in jewelry making, in pottery, and singing in a choir. They also attended concerts and art exhibits. So who wouldn't want to be one of those people, right? Be part of that study. Now, what's interesting is the results. Everyone in both groups continued to age, but some striking trends emerged. The participants in the study who were in the arts program, they aged more slowly. Their health stabilized as opposed to those who were in the control group. Compared to the control group, those people in the art group, they also used less medication, they were less likely to fall, and they had fewer doctor visits. So what does this mean for you? What does this mean for all of us? If we want to improve our chances of aging well, we need to consider taking up photography, knitting, painting, whatever it is. We need to sing on our own or with others, join a group of fellow artists so that we can share those exhilarating feelings of creating art in a group, even if it's outside or on Zoom. So we are in a pandemic. That's my last slide. How do I do this? How do I sing in a choir? How do I join an art group when there's a global pandemic on? Well, we know from the experience of the last 18 months that isolation is one of the big negative consequences of trying to keep myself safe in a pandemic. Many of you are also aware that depression and anxiety are common symptoms of Parkinson's disease. It's about 50% of those living with Parkinson's disease who will experience some form of depression in the course of their illness, and 40% will experience anxiety. So you can only imagine that on top of that, being isolated from contact with other human beings, that's going to compound these feelings of depression and anxiety. So whether through Zoom, online groups, with a household member, on your own, I'm encouraging each one of you and myself, I've got to do this as well, to commit to starting to color, doodle, sing, listen to music, and see the results for ourselves. And remember, in making art, there are no mistakes. I want to thank you all, remind you that I get to have the wonderful job of being the community education coordinator for Signature Hospice Eugene. And I have on this PowerPoint resources. So this page are the different websites that I used as resources. And this final page are the different research studies that I used as resources. Thank you all so much.